Growing up, I was a massive Percy Jackson fan, and after how disappointing the movies were, I was beyond excited when I heard that Disney was making a reboot. I was especially excited after hearing that Riordan would serve as a writer on the series. In this review, I'm going to go through the series episode by episode and break down what I liked, what I didn't, what changes I liked, what changes I didn't. Also, full spoilers for both the first season of the show and the first novel. As for episode 1, I really like the way that this episode, and really the series as a whole, depicts Percy and Sally's relationship. It manages to show how close they are through the way that they interact. I also like that they included the mytho-magic cards because it helps the universe feel more expansive. However, I don't really like how the series changed the scene where Percy kills the Fury, because it took an exciting action scene and turned it into kind of an accident. I'm also not really a fan of the way that the series modified Sally and Gabe's relationship. In the books, as well as in the movies, it was much clearer that Gabe was verbally and later physically abusive. That way we didn't feel as bad when Sally kills him later in the novel, and it also created sympathy for Percy as a character. The fight with the Minotaur was fine. I mean, it was shot and choreographed okay, but it felt a little bit too short. Moving on to episode 2, I think here is where Walker Scobell really shines as Percy. He gets Percy's sense of humor and curiosity perfect. I really love the interactions between him and Dionysus, and they get Dionysus's personality perfect.
Yeah, Grover. I heard him the first time.
But did you?
I also really like Leah Jeffries as Annabeth. She perfectly pulls off the wise girl that's very mature for her age. I also really like the production design for Camp Half-Blood. It's exactly the way that I pictured it in the book. I love the cabins, the big house, as well as the forest and the lake. I really love the way that Clarice is depicted. It's exactly how she was in the books, and they got the bathroom scene where Percy humiliates her perfect. The capture the flag sequence was okay. While I really liked the sets and the costumes, as well as some of the fight choreography, Percy flossing was a bit cringy, and while I get that demigods are supposed to be naturally good at fighting, Percy feels a little bit too good here for a beginner. If they had included maybe 1 or 2 more scenes of Percy and Luke sparring, I may have been okay with it, but as it stands, I don't really like it. That leads me into my next point, which is that I wish that we had gotten a little bit more of Percy and Luke in this episode. If they had included another scene or 2 of them, it would have made the reveal of Luke as a villain a little bit more heartbreaking. With the way that the show depicts it, they don't really feel like friends, they just kind of feel like people who know each other-ish. Also, I think that Annabeth figuring out that Percy is the son of Poseidon was a little too smart for her. I understand that she's the daughter of the goddess of wisdom and is supposed to be a very intuitive person, but I thought this was a bit much. Moving on to episode 3. This episode is the first instance of something that the series does several times that I don't like, which is when the main trio is able to figure out what creature or monster they're facing before that creature or monster reveals itself. In the books, there was always a sense of mystery whenever the group stumbled upon a new location, because you know that they're gonna run into some sort of monster, creature, or character from Greek mythology, but Riordan always did a good job kind of building suspense to figure out what exactly they would face and how they would get out of it. Here, the kids immediately figure out that Auntie Em is Medusa, which takes away all suspense. However, I do like that Medusa is kind of reframed as more of a victim than a monster. It contributes to kind of the theme of the series about the gods not really caring about anyone or anything. I also like that the series made it so that Alecto was the monster chasing Annabeth, Luke, Grover, and Talia when they were on their way to Camp Half-Blood. It really adds a lot of tension to the scenes between Annabeth and Alecto. That being said, there were some negatives in this episode. I felt that the fight at the bus was kind of clunkily shot and not very well edited. I also didn't really like Grover singing. It felt tonally off. Episode 4 might be the most mediocre episode in the series. Like, there's nothing about it that I really dislike, but nothing about it I really like either. It makes quite a few changes from the book, but none of them are overtly positive or overtly negative. On the positive side, this is where the 3 main actors really began to click for me. They really started to feel like a trio of characters who are friends. I do really like the scene where Percy sacrifices himself for Annabeth and Grover. It shows how selfless Percy is and how much he's bonded with Grover and Annabeth. However, I'm not really a fan of Echidna starting to chase the group before they get to the arch. In the book, the whole reason they went to the St. Louis Arch was because Annabeth, an architecture nerd, wanted to see it. And being an architect is a huge part of Annabeth's character that they kind of sideline here. I'm also not really a fan of the pacing of this episode. The middle chunk really slows down. It really lacks a sense of urgency and forward momentum. And this episode is yet another example of the climactic action scene being way too short. I feel like this whole episode built up to a fight between Percy and Echidna, and then the fight itself just doesn't pay off that tension. Moving on to episode 5. I think episode 5 might be my favorite episode of the series. It's definitely an improvement over the past couple. While it does make a few changes from the book, all of the changes help serve the story or characters or themes. I really like the actor who plays Ares. He feels like a modern version of a Greek god. He's got a sense of confidence about him, but also feels dangerous. I also like the way that the series changed the obstacle that Percy and Annabeth have to go through in order to get the shield back. I feel like the way it's done in the series helps grow the relationship between Percy and Annabeth, while also showing how selfless Percy is. I genuinely laughed out loud when they got on the ride and What Is Love started playing.
What is love? Baby, don't hurt me. Don't hurt me.
What is happening right now?
I also like that Hephaestus appeared and gave his little monologue because it contributes to the theme of the series. And perhaps the biggest change that this episode made was that Grover stays behind with Ares while Percy and Annabeth go on their little side quests. And I actually like this change because I like how Grover is able to manipulate information out of Ares, because it shows how smart Grover is, as well as kind of sets up the role that Ares will play going forward. Overall, this episode was a huge step up for the series, and I really, really wish they would have kept that momentum going, because episode 6 was rough. It wasn't terrible, but it was definitely a step down considering how much I enjoyed episode 5. Once again, I don't really like the fact that the characters figure out that they're in the Lotus Casino from the Odyssey before they actually enter the casino. It takes away the sense of mystery as to what's going on and makes the scene a lot less fun. Ironically, once again, this is a sequence that the movie actually did pretty well and captured the spirit of, I thought, pretty accurately. I'm also not sure I really like this portrayal of Hermes. For one, he doesn't really feel like a Greek god, and two, he just isn't nearly as sympathetic as he was in the books. And lastly, I don't really like the final reveal that the characters missed the summer solstice, because it doesn't really add anything to the series. Like, they could have just had it be how it is in the book, where the characters make it to the deadline, or before the deadline, and the plot would play out pretty much the same. Moving on to episode 7. This episode stumbled a bit, but ended really well. I really like the sequence with the Cerberus because it had the same, fun and silly, but also suspenseful tone that it had in the book. I also really like the production design for the Underworld. While, yes, the special effects could be better. One, it's a TV budget, and two, this is something that would be really hard to do practically. However, I don't really see the point of having Annabeth not make it to Hades' palace. I feel like the sequence would have played out pretty much the same if she had been there the whole time. I also don't really like this portrayal of Hades. In the books, Hades is much more powerful and intimidating, and here he just feels too laid back. I also don't really like how Percy figures out this early on that Kronos is the one behind the whole thing. While sure, it wasn't the greatest twist ever in the original novel, it did create a sense of mystery throughout the entire novel that culminated in the final reveal. However, I really love the way this episode ended. I love that we got more scenes with Percy and his mom because it makes the audience much more invested in their relationship, and Poseidon's reveal genuinely gave me goosebumps. I loved the build up to the fight with Ares. It was shot and edited perfectly and made me itch for the next episode. Last but not least, we have episode 8. This episode wasn't bad, but it definitely stumbled a little bit. Once again, while the Percy versus Ares fight was shot and edited really well, it was way too short. And while I like that we got more Percy and Luke scenes because it helps build the bond between the two, those scenes should have been earlier in the series so that the audience was already invested in their bond before this episode. I thought that Lance Reddick, rest in peace, did okay as Zeus. He definitely feels intimidating, but he just lacks a sense of grandeur that the Zeus in the novel had. I also feel like the series could have done a better job defining Luke's motivation. I feel like it was much more clear in the books why he was doing what he was doing. I also do not like the way that the second half of this episode is written and structured at all. It jumped around way too much in time, as well as jumping between dreams and reality in a way that just made it feel super anticlimactic. I also wish we had actually gotten to see a scene where Percy reunites with his mother, because it would have been such a cathartic moment. Instead, it ends up being a dream sequence that just basically tells us stuff we already know. So overall, I thought the series was pretty mediocre, honestly. I thought that Walker Scobell was great as Percy, and that Jeffries and Simhadri did well also. And while I liked some of the changes from the novel, a lot of them I didn't. The biggest change that I really don't like is how, in 3 separate instances in the series, the main trio is able to figure out what monster or obstacle they're going to have to face before the monster reveals itself. It takes away a lot of the mystery and suspense that the books did so well. On top of that, pretty much every action scene in the show, while it's shot, edited, and choreographed well, feels way too short. That may have been a budgetary thing, but it just feels anticlimactic. And perhaps the biggest problem with this series is that it just feels bland. It just feels like generic Disney Plus content. There aren't really a lot of interesting filmmaking or dynamic choices, and the series definitely over-relies on the volume, which really makes it feel artificial. Overall, I think I'm going to give it a mixed review. It's not the worst adaptation ever, and it's definitely an improvement over the movies, but I really hope that when it comes time for Sea of Monsters, they fix a lot of the issues from this first season. So that's it. That's my review. I understand it's a little late, but what can you do? What did y'all think about the Percy Jackson TV show? Did you like it? Did you dislike it? Let me know in the comments below. Also, what changes did the show make from the book that you liked, and which ones did you not like? As always, thank you so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe. Bye.